long. I know the Wife of Bath's prologue and tale is super long, but instead of going through the PDF, I have it set up today where I just kind of made an outline, and I'm going to talk about the outline points for her prologue and her tale. And then that way you can just get notes or look at your own notes and see what you might be missing. It takes me too long on these really long tales to go through the PDF because I want to stop and talk about every little detail. So I forced myself to do a slideshow that was just sort of an outline. I have the chat there, so if you have questions today while I'm going through stuff, then you can ask me. Today, we're talking about the Wife of Bath's prologue and tale. Where is my PowerPoint on that? Here it is. So here's an image from the Ellesmere manuscript, which is the one where we get the text of the Canterbury Tales. And this is the Wife of Bath, in her outfit on her horse. This is her riding crop so that she can spur the horse if she needs to, but that's an image of her. I wanted to do a few notes a little bit on the portrait. I know that you were not assigned to read the general prologue portrait for the Wife of Bath, but I want to talk about that because how she's described in the portrait kind of gives us some characterization for the prologue and also for the tale that she tells. And that's one of the cool things about this piece is that Chaucer can create the characters and then he can create the tale that that character would tell. It might not be a tale that he personally would tell, but it's a tale that this woman would tell or that monk would tell. So this is on page 272 in your PDF text if you wanted to find it, but you can also see it here on the screen. So this is the Middle English version, but I'll just give you the basics. So the Wife of Bath is a secular person. She's one of the few women on the trip who are not associated with the church in that she's not a nun or a prioress. She hasn't given her life over to religious service. All of the other women, and there aren't that many, most of them are men. All the other women are nuns, or there's a prioress, and she's in charge of a priory, which is a group of nuns. So they're all, in the service of God. But the Wife of Bath is secular. You can tell because she's a wife, and that they do tell you later that her name is Allison, but in her portrait, they just call her the wife. That's true with most of the characters in the general prologue. It's not that she's being discriminated against. Most of them are just the parson, the mandible, manciple, the mandible. Anyway, she's deaf in one ear. Later on, we find out why. She makes cloth and very fine woven handkerchiefs and things like that. She's the type of woman who has a certain amount of money. We find out in her prologue that the reason she has money is because she has been married 5 times and she has gained money each time that she's been married. And so she's not wealthy, but she's in that emerging middle class where she doesn't have to work for a living much. She's been on many pilgrimages, so she can spend money on those sorts of things. So when she goes to give an offering at church, she wants to be the first one to do it. She wants everybody to see her put her money in the box so that everybody knows that she's contributing. She's got a red face. She's got red stockings. She's a little overweight. He talks about her hips being large, and she needs like a larger horse to support her. Her stockings are red, which is not something that you would wear if you weren't daring. So she's kind of like an out there type person. Right here it says bold was her face and fair and red of hue. So her face is also red, which is a sign of, to them it's a sign of robustness, right? She's not pale and like sickly. She's got the blood in her cheeks and all that stuff. She's had 5 husbands, and she's looking for her 6th one, or she's on her 6th one. And it says, not counting all the company that she had in youth. So she is very knowledgeable about relationships between men and women. She has, and she talks about that very freely in her prologue. The Wife of Bath is one of the most detailed characters in the Canterbury Tales, and she's quite famous. It's really the first time that a woman has been detailed in English literature, and and forms a character of her own where she's got her own opinions and her own ideas and things like that. And so the Wife of Bath is often thought of as almost a feminist character. Chaucer created her, but she's outspoken, she's got opinions, and she, is living her life. She's out there. When one husband dies, she marries another one. And matter of fact, she talks about in her prologue that um, she found her current husband at her previous husband's funeral. She couldn't really think about the funeral. She was looking at his legs. So she talks about all that stuff pretty freely. She's been on many other pilgrimages. Oops. She's been on many other pilgrimages. They list all the places that she's been. So that means she has to have a certain amount of money. And it also means that she, likes to go and accompany people and be out in the world. And I think it's more like a trip than it is a religious experience. So it's an opportunity for her to go on a trip. Not that she's doesn't love Jesus, but it's more of a social thing for her. This is the second part of the prologue. She's wearing a wimple and a large hat. A wimple is, let me go back to that picture. I should have put the picture on that page. So a wimple is this part, maybe you've seen movies or something like that, where it's like old time nuns. If you've ever seen Sound of Music, the nuns are wearing a wimple. It's like the white part that goes around their face and it covers their neck, and their cloak and their hat go on top of it. But the white part that where only their eyebrows and their face right here show, all that white part is the wimple. And you don't really see people wearing that nowadays unless, like I guess in the Middle Eastern culture with burqas and stuff like that. But nuns would wear it, but it was also a stylish thing for back in the day. And she's got a large hat. Here's where it talks about her large hips, right, that she's riding. She's got spurs on. She's outfitted. She's been on this kind of trip before. She knows what's what. She's fun, she laughs, and she makes jokes with people, and she knew a lot about love, and Chaucer calls it the old dance. Going back ages into the caveman times, people had to get together, and she knows a lot about that. And so usually when we read the general prologue, we're like, ooh, I can't wait to see what kind of story this lady's gonna tell. And she tells a good one. But he portrays her in the general prologue in this way, and she is a standout. All the rest of the characters are kind of either religious, most of them are religious, or they're corrupt, or they're mean, or something like that. There's only a couple that are really good, solid people. She's good, solid person. To medieval standards, she's maybe a little too sexual. They really prized people who were virginal, but she takes that on in her prologue, and she explains why, you got to have ladies that are having babies. You got to keep, if you want more people worshiping God, then they got to have babies. And to do that, you got to do the old dance, right? So that's the portrait in the general prologue. When we get to her prologue to her tale, the prologue is longer than her tale actually is. And the reason is because she's telling about the her life, and they're super interested in it. She gets interrupted several times, and they're wondering about, how she manipulated men and how she avoided being manipulated and all kinds of questions. And so she talks for a long time about her experiences and her beliefs about marriage and, like male-female relationships. And it's a real window into that mindset for this time, because most of the works up until this point, nobody cared what women thought. I think most people mentioned that when they were working on their discussions. We don't have women really showing up in major ways in the literature before Chaucer. So I'm going to go through some main points and I'm going to talk about each main point. So if you wanted to make notes or double check your notes that you already made, then you can use these as headings for an outline or whatever you might do. But I thought this would be a little bit quicker than going through the prologue and the tale bit by bit. So one of the first things that the wife of Bath says in her prologue is that marriage is difficult no matter what you do. That marriage is probably more difficult than chastity, because she kind of pits those two things together. A woman had two choices in the Middle Ages. You were either going to get married and go the route of having children and having that life, or you were going to go into the convent and be a nun. Basically, that was it. If you were of the aristocracy, then you could just be wealthy and have children and so on and so forth. But she has had 5 husbands, and she says no matter what in marriage, husbands will suffer. And this causes difficulty in marriage no matter what. Because the two people are always trying to negotiate around each other, and she turns marriage into this battle, really. And that's her perspective. I mean, I have to think that's probably true in a patriarchal society, right? Not that we're not in a patriarchal society today, but I think we have more freedoms as women than other places on the planet, and certainly other times in history. But she says the husbands suffer no matter what, and her suggestion is that the women don't like being bossed around and being controlled, and so they're always fighting back, and so there's always a conflict there. At least she's found that to be true with her 5 husbands. She also says that chastity is ideal. So there's this big debate during the Middle Ages. There were some different church writers who said that the ultimate state for women is to be chaste, meaning that they abstain from sex. They aren't interested in any of the pleasures of, a relationship and marriage and all of that stuff. And they're just sort of like on a pedestal, being perfect and pristine. And there were some people who wrote against that, but that was the church's main take, is that that is the ultimate position for a woman. Well, then, if that's the ultimate for a woman, then marriage and having children is something beneath that. And the wife of Bath argues that it's not practical. She says, this idea of women being put up on a pedestal as perfect because they're not tainted in their bodies and so on is not practical, and it shouldn't be elevated over any other type of woman. She says, let's not look down on married women, and let's make sure that we understand that we need both types of women. And we probably need married women even more, because they're producing children so that, our existence can continue. If you have a woman that's chaste and is abstaining from sex for her life and on a pedestal, that's fine and everything, but we're going to die out if all the women aspire to that. So she talks about how she has a couple of metaphors that she uses that I think are pretty funny. Well, not funny. They're just like perfect. She says that women are like dishes, right? Like there's those dishes that your mom has that are up in the cupboard, right? They come down maybe at Christmas time or like certain things, and she calls them gold dishes. They're carefully washed and put back on the shelf, or we just look at them. We never really even use them, right? Does your mom have a set of glasses that are crystal or something and nobody ever touches them? We don't ever use them. They're nice to look at. She said those are like the chaste women, but the dishes that you use every day, the wooden dishes, those ones with the chips in it that we just need to eat dinner right now, those are like the married women, because okay, they're tainted in their virginity, but they are needed. We have to eat off of something every day, right? We need to use silverware. We need to, pull out those dishes that we use all the time. They're mismatched. They're, knockabout. And she said, so those wooden dishes are often used, is what she says. And so the metaphor is comparing to a married woman who is often used sexually and produces children. The other metaphor she uses is with bread. And I find it interesting that I don't think I've ever read a paper on this, but I find it interesting that she uses kitchen metaphors, right, to talk about the difference between these pure women and these married women. And so the other one is bread. She talks about how married women are like barley bread, brown bread that you just bake up every day, that staple that you have. And this is a distinction that we don't really understand because you can go to HEB and get any kind of bread you want. But if you have to make bread from scratch, just think about it. If you take wheat and you grind it down into flour, it's not white. It's brown. And to get it to be white, you have to go through another process. And it's not a big deal today, but it was a big deal in medieval times. White flour was rare. So to make white bread, pure and without flaw and, pristine looking, took a lot of extra effort, expense, and white flour was therefore not something that the average woman really ever saw. But brown, like if you just want to make bread, you have to grind that wheat, get it going. You don't care if it's brown, mix it up, put it in the oven. I have to feed my family. So she uses that metaphor also to talk about the difference between chaste women, the white bread, and women with flaws, women who aren't perfectly pure and just have to keep society going. And so she's trying to make the argument, or Chaucer's making the argument through the wife of Bath, that these women that we're kind of putting on the second shelf are really more integral to our society and our growth as people than these ones that we would put on, these nuns that we put up on a shelf, or these chaste women who are like, oh, I will never marry. Well, what good are you to society then? Right? How are you helping out? She says God obviously intended some women to be unchaste, right? Some women to lose their virginity. She said, why else did he give us organs of reproduction? I mean, she lays it out. And she says, why do we have organs of reproduction if God didn't mean for us to use them? And not only that, but it's enjoyable. So God made it so that sex not only produced children, but also was enjoyable for the participants. So God must want us to do it. And so she makes that argument, and she says, besides, who's going to make the next generation of virgins except these women? So she gives all these reasons why she thinks God meant for some women to marry, and not everybody can be that, pure white bread, that, those dishes, those gold dishes that are on the shelf. If you have questions, you can put it in the chat over there. I know I say that a lot. Okay, so then she launches into a discussion of how women control men, and how these married women operate. And when we read that, it comes off a lot manipulative. And nowadays, I do think people do a lot of those things. And I'll go through all the things that she says that women can do to manipulate men. But I think that we should sort of frame it with the lens of, if you're a woman born into that society, you're already not equal to the men in society, and you might not have any choices in your own life because they would be made for you. So the manipulations that women do and the wife talks about are just for them to, survive, pretty much. So it's kind of like, you know, getting through this patriarchal oppression that they have to do. And so it's a little bit of their subterfuge to try to find a place for themselves to have a voice or to have a position. So in order for women to control men, this is actually, I feel like this is good advice for today too. Here's what she says women can do. She says, number one, you have to make them beg. You have to use your womanly powers to force them to beg to be with you. Number one. Also, she says if you nag them a lot, that's good, because then when you turn around and give them the very slightest bit of affection, they'll be joyful and happy just for that tiny little crumb. So basically, be bitchy. Um, she says, make them feel like everything they do is wrong so that they'll try harder to please you. If they do something halfway right and you praise them, then they're never going to do it 100% right. So she says, every time a man does something, um, make them feel like it's wrong until they do it 100% right, or they won't keep trying. She said, be the first one to complain um, about the other person. And in that way, you can control the man, because if you're complaining, he's going to want to put an end to your complaining. And she talks about how she would just complain every waking moment of the day, and he would be so tired of hearing her complain that he would just give in to whatever her demand was, whatever she wanted. So that's her tool. She says, make them feel guilty, make them feel like they owe you something, make them think that you are jealous so that they will not sneak around. And let me see what else. I have a little list here. Don't have sex with them unless you can get something from it. So you have to hold out until there's something that you want, and then you only use sex to get something that you want, either an item or, time or whatever. She says, you argue until he gives up. Don't stop arguing. I feel like it'd be pretty miserable to be married to somebody like that. But it just sort of underscores the position that women felt like they were in at the time, that they had to resort to these manipulations in order to have some sort of control over their lives. Um, what else? She says, oh, always be looking for your next husband, and don't be shy about it. Let him know that you're always looking for your next husband, and make sure that he's aware that you've got your eye toward his successor. He's got to try harder to keep your attention. So, I don't know, take that advice if depending on how you see that. I do think there are people who do those things. Nowadays, we would call that playing games or whatever, but yeah. She does talk a little bit. One of the other pilgrims says to her, "Well, fine, but how do how do men get women then? If all this stuff is set up to manipulate us, how do men get women?" And she goes, well, you have to be standoffish. Women love a challenge. Women love to have to go after you. And so you have to basically play hard to get. And she talks about how one of her husbands was like that. Dimitri. um, and she also says that you can't tell a woman your faults. Like, don't open up about all of your weaknesses, because she will exploit them. Well, yeah, after all those things that she just said that women will do to manipulate, don't open yourself up to manipulation by sharing your faults with her, because then she'll just see you as weak. So a lot of in the Canterbury Tales at this point, a lot of the pilgrims gather around her because they're getting information from her and trying to understand the nature of the male-female relationship from her. And so they ask her a bunch of questions, and maybe that's why it's so long. Maybe it's also long because Chaucer wants to give a woman's perspective on things in society at the time, which is revolutionary. The last thing she does in her prologue is she talks about her own marriages and how they were all different from one another. The main thing to remember about the marriages of the wife of Bath is that she has progressed from having to marry an older man when she was, I think, 13 was when she had her first husband. Her husband was probably 30. This sounds weird to us and illegal. But at the time, think about lifespan. The average person lived to be maybe 45. Women had a lot of issues with childbirth. The infant mortality rate was like 50% or more. So you would have to have 6 or 7 children for 3 or 4 of them to survive. And so they had to start early. So they would marry these 13-year-olds off to men who were established, who could support a family and were ready to settle down. So she talks about how her first husbands were older, and that's really how she got her money, because they died. And she inherited the money from them. And over time, so as the arc of her marriages continues, she's able to go ahead and start picking men that she wants, because now they're attracted to her because of her money, and they might inherit from her. So the tide kind of turns in her relationship. She talks about how she had 5 husbands, 3 were good and 2 were bad. And the 3 good ones were rich and old. The young ones have given her trouble. Uh, so she talks about how she enjoys them because she enjoys having, marital relations with them, but they just give her a hard time all the time. And she's always having to use her manipulations and her tools on them. And they're harder to manipulate because they're young and feisty. The old ones are just kind of like, oh, whatever. But the younger ones are kind of like fighting her back for control in the relationship. She says that her 4th husband was a reveler. She uses the word reveler, meaning that he would always go out. He was always out and about with people, and that made her jealous. And so they fought a lot. The 5th one is the one that she's married to right now. She says she's kind of looking for her 6th one, but she's been married to this 5th one, Jenkin, and she loves him. She thought about his legs, when I already said, when she was at the funeral for her 4th husband, when her 4th husband's body is being brought to the church for the funeral. She can't stop thinking about this guy's legs, and she's 40 and he is 20. So I guess that's kind of even an odd thing today. There's TV shows about it, I think, where there's the older woman and the younger man, right? But the younger men are not attracted to her physically, probably, but because she has wealth. And when she dies, they'll inherit her money. So she said she gave Jenkin, her 5th husband that she's married to now, all of her husband's money because she loved him. She just said, okay, here, you can have all the stuff. But he hit her. And in one of their arguments, he was reading a book and he was reading it out loud to her about good wives and bad wives. And he's reading it to her as an example to try to tell her she should be a better wife. And they're arguing about it, and he throws the book at her and it hits her. She falls over, but then she uses that, because she thinks in a manipulative way, she uses that to her advantage, and she starts crying. She goes deaf because of it in one ear, and she starts crying, and he feels bad forever and ever. And so now they're devoted to each other because she uses this attack to gain the upper hand, which is what she's all about. Even the tale is about how can a woman get the upper hand over a man. So she pretends like she needs all this sympathy from him, and now for the rest of their marriage, she can say, "Remember that time that you made me go deaf with that book that you threw at me?" Right? Like that's her trump card always. So so she talks about how she finally found peace in marriage through that manipulation. And so all of this kind of sets up the tone for what she's going to talk about in her tale. Is there anything from the prologue that I didn't mention that you want me to mention or talk about? That's kind of like overview. Wife of Bath is like everybody's favorite character. All right, so I just want to go over the plot basically, and then I have a video to show you. So yay, you came to class today, and I have a fun video of the Wife of Bath's tale to share with you. And then maybe we'll preview this week's discussion a little bit, and that'll be it for today. Okay, so the Wife of Bath's tale is shorter than her prologue. Basically, there is this knight in Camelot, and it should remind you a little bit of Sir Gawain, because you have some of the same characters with Arthur and Guinevere and so on later on. There's this knight, and he is not chivalrous. He attacks this maiden and he rapes her. And the wife says that he gets brought into court for trial. And Arthur gives the decisions over to Guinevere. So here's the first example of a male-female relationship in the story. The first one is the rape scenario, the overpowering of a woman by a man. But then you have almost the reversal when that night comes to trial, because Arthur turns control of the decision making and the consequences to this night over to his wife, Guinevere, and he leaves. And so she reigns over the proceedings. So it's kind of like a reversal of the first male-female relationship, right? So Guinevere gives the knight a hard time, and she says that he's got 1 year to go out and find out what it is that women want most, because she wants for him to be more sensitive to women, obviously, since he thinks that he can just jump off of his horse and take a maiden's virginity at any time and place, which is not chivalrous. He goes for a year asking people, but everybody has a different answer. Some people say, well, they want, a nice house, or they want to have good clothing, or they want to have money, or women want all these different things. So he doesn't get a clear answer, and a year and a day from his sentence, he's on his way back, and he's, really depressed about it because he thinks he's going to get killed. He's going to face a death penalty because he doesn't have an answer. And as he's returning back to Camelot, he runs in this woods. The woods in medieval literature oftentimes is a place of fairies and magical things happen. Even through the Renaissance, that's true. So as he's there, he's going through the woods, sort of sad, heading back to Camelot. He runs into these dancing women, and they magically turn into this old woman. So there's some magic afoot. And she says, "What are you so upset about? Why are you mad?" And he explains the situation. She goes, "Well, the answer is easy. I can tell you the answer, but you have to promise me that you will do whatever I ask whenever I ask you. Like, I get one wish." "Oh, please, 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 whatever you want, old lady. I'll do whatever you want." He's just thinking about his own needs. And so he agrees, and she tells him, and the answer is, women want sovereignty over their lives. They want control over their own lives and control over men. And so he returns to court, and he gives the answer to Guinevere, and Guinevere and the women that are there to hear his answer can't deny that that's true. So he's going to be let to go free, except that the old woman's there, and she says, "Well, I'm the one who gave him that answer, and he has to do the next thing I ask of him, and I want him to marry me." And of course, she's like wrinkly and old, and he's a young knight, obviously thinks he's a stud. And he's like, "Oh no, anything but that. I'm not marrying this old hag, gross, gross, gross." And Guinevere, perks up, and she goes, "I think that's perfect. If you promise, then you have to fulfill your promise. That's part of chivalry. You have to live up to your word." And so she makes them get married. And the knight doesn't want to have the wedding night. He says, "All right, fine, because of chivalry, I'll marry her. I know I'm not happy about it." And he's super grumpy and all that, but he goes through with it. And that night, he doesn't want to go through with the wedding night because she's old and wrinkly, and she's not sexy and young and all that stuff. And she says, "Well, actually, I would be a better wife to you, because if I'm look like this, I'm not going to be unfaithful to you, and I'll be your partner throughout life." And he's like, "Ah, no, you're gross, whatever, you're all saggy and baggy." And and she says, "Well, you can have a wife who's old but faithful, or one who's young and beautiful and sexy, and you can't trust her. And anybody who comes over, you don't know if she's out in the back with that guy. like, what do you really want in your life? And he goes, uh, and he's like debating. And finally he says, well, I guess I'd rather have a faithful wife than an unfaithful one. So fine, whatever you want, um, I'll go along with it. And so what she really wanted all along was the power to decide. And so he chooses old and she rewards him with being young and faithful, is the story. So at the end, the old woman turns herself into a young and beautiful wife, and she promises still to be faithful to him because he chooses to give the power over to her. So that's the basic plot of the story. Are there any questions about what happens in it? It's not terribly long. It's a pretty good story. I'm hoping that you saw shades of Sir Gawain in there, except this knight is not chivalrous. He's the opposite of Gawain. Okay, so just a few things before I show you the little video of the of the story. So one of the reasons why the Wife of Bath's tale is so important and the Wife of Bath's prologue is because it brings up certain philosophical and societal questions, mainly dealing with women, that weren't asked up until now. Nobody cared what women thought. So Chaucer brings up this idea really for the first time in English literature. So one of the things that the woman, the old woman in the tale brings up is what is noble. When the knight is disgusted by her and she forces the marriage on him, she brings up the idea of what really is nobility. Is nobility something that you have because your dad had a title? Like, just because you're rich, does that mean that you're a good person? Obviously not, because here's this knight who raped a maiden, and he's so, like kind of cruel to the old woman after she wants satisfaction for the promise that he made. So he's not noble. He's of noble rank, but where is real nobility lie? Is it in deed? Is it in action, or is it in birthright? And so she's bringing up for the first time, is it about our behaviors that make us noble, or is it just if we have money? Because I've known plenty of rich people who were jerks. So, and plenty of, poor people who were noble. So, where does that really lie? Because society would have told them that if you had a position, you were automatically noble. She brings up the idea of what is true nobility. The Wife of Bath also brings up the idea of what do women really want and why do we care as a society, bringing into the field that women might actually be people too and might actually have opinions and goals for themselves. They might have to claw for it like the Wife of Bath, but why should we care what women want in society? Why is that something to pay attention to? Is there more value in a chaste woman than one who marries? Because she argues that that is not true, even though the church is kind of telling them that that's true. In society, actually, women who are married have more value because of what they can bring to society. And so that question is brought up. And then the last one is, who really holds power over men? There are a lot of, like sort of old wives' tales that say, the woman holds the strings to the man, right? What is it? The man is the head of the family, but the woman is the neck, right? There are lots of ideas like that. So the idea is that even if the man is the breadwinner in a family or the lead of the family, that the woman is the support system and he really couldn't exist without her. So all these questions are brought up really for the first time in society and certainly in literature. Okay. So here's the video. I forget how long it is. It's not long. It's like maybe 7 or 8 minutes. I think this is a really interesting version. It's animated. It's a little bit graphic. It's nothing inappropriate, I don't think. But, you know, when we get to the end and he's in the bedroom with the old woman, she's not wearing any clothes, I'm just gonna say. I don't know. Maybe if you're asleep, you'll wake up. But I'm gonna play it for you and hopefully you enjoy it. I think I have to turn off my AirPods for you to hear it. Send me a note in the chat if I can't hear.
Madam, what a delightful expostulation. But surely only a preamble, I trust. Impressive, isn't he? A friar, dedicated to poverty. You know, he's even been known to stump up a girl's dowry out of his own pocket. Oh, so she can get married nice and quick. The church has got its hands on all the serious studs. Who's layman? We're just tiddlers.
That's why wives end up lighting churchmen's candles.
What soulless. What a delightful princess. You don't like it. Why don't you boil your bum? He hauls people off to court. Summoner by rank.
Here, oi, what's a fly got in common with a friar?
Oh, I don't know. What's a fly?
They've both got their snouts in your lunch.
I'll tell a story or two about summoners. Then we'll see who sneers.
Nobody minds. Sir Friar.
We'd be honoured.
Thank you. Back in the good old days of King Arthur, there were spirits everywhere you look. Nowadays, with all the friars going round, they're all gone. Anyway, at King Arthur's court, there was a strong, lusty knight bachelor. And one day he was riding down by the river. He was all alone, and he saw this virgin lass.
Look, King Arthur, look, King Arthur.
Of course, there was an absolute outcry. Arthur gave him over to Guinevere. She should choose whether to save his blood or spill it. I'll spare you if you can tell us what do women most desire. Right, speak up. An answer to that will keep your neck bone safe from this hard iron.
I don't know.
I suppose if you can't tell us now, we'll let you have 12 months and a day. Go. He went to every door and every town where he could hope to unearth the answer, but everyone had a different idea.
Could you tell me, what does a woman most desire?
Her place in society.
My good man, what do women most desire?
Money.
Fancy clothes.
Right, saying to her.
The day had come that he must turn homeward. His spirit was broken, his hopes bitter ashes. His route took him to a forest, and there he saw 24 dancing ladies.
Maybe they'll have the answer. Maybe.
No way through here, sir. Tell us what you're looking for.
Mother, what do women most desire? If you can tell me, I'd make it worth your while.
Give me your oath. You'll do the very next thing I ask of you, and before sunset, you'll have your answer.
My oath, you have it. Anything.
Your life is safe. Listen. Silence! Well?
My lady queen. Apparently, women desire sovereignty over husband and lover. They desire the upper hand at all times. Now do with me as you will.
None of them, not wife, nor virgin, nor widow, could argue with that. He had his life. Sovereign Lady Queen? Oh, I gave him that answer. In return, he swore he'd do the first thing I asked. Take me as your wife.
Take all my worldly goods if you must. Let my body alone.
I want to be your wife and your love.
Enough. My damnation, sovereign. Should someone of my rank be brought so low?
He had no choice but to marry her, to take the old woman into his bed. And as for all the rejoicing and all the arrangements for the wedding feast, there wasn't any. No joy, no feast. He became her husband in a private ceremony and spent the day hidden like an owl. Darling husband, are all Arthur's knights so hard to please? I've saved your life. What have I done wrong?
Oh,
Tell me. I'll change.
change. Wonderful change. You're so hideous, so old, and so
I
common.
could change all that if only you behaved a little more courteously to
Are you
me.
surprised at me?
You're talking nobility, arrogance. The man who attempts the noblest deeds. He's the noblest
Always
man.
the old, always
Then
ugly.
you need never fear rivals. You have a choice. Plain and old, but your faithful, obedient wife. Oh, young and beautiful, and danger whenever friends visit our house. Whatever you prefer.
Oh, I put myself in your hands. Whatever you want, my wife pleases me.
Do I have the upper hand then? Do I make all the choices, all decisions?
That is best.
No more arguments. I will be beautiful and true. Look at me. Yes. I sent his old husbands is meek and young and hard, and the grace to break them.
You say so. And a swift exit for those who won't be broken.
Well, I'll give a barrel of ale to have my wife hear that story. Talk about upper hand.
Okay. So I hope you liked that version of the story.
That's the one for
The wife of Bath. Any reactions? No.
no. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
Well, that version kind of suggests that she's going to be young and beautiful, but only when he looks. There was something. Only when he looks at her, right? Like when they go out together, everybody else is going to see the old hag. That one kind of suggests that.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like the song, if you want to be happy for the rest of your life, you have to make a pretty woman
I don't know that song.
your wife.
I don't know that one. You guys, before we go, I do want to talk a little bit about the discussion number 2, but Mr. Ramos wants to say something, so I want to give him the opportunity.
All right, so I see how many people here I had last year and at the end of the semester. Do you remember the book that we had last year in 1302? Is called The Well-Crafted Argument. Let me go get it. I'll show it to you.
I think what he's going to say is that they're running short of those books for the students this year, and they need to try to get a few more. I don't know why it's not showing up. Okay, let me just turn off the background. Say what you're going to say.
So if you would, and you get a chance, just drop it off at East, right? It'd be better. Yeah, I believe you probably all have yours. They didn't ask you to turn them back in, but they are, they're on short supply. I need 17 of them and pretty quickly. So if you would, or if you have a chance, get your parents or yourself to drop it off at East. And there's go to the front office. I'll let them know that.
Or like a friend who has practice or something in the evenings, or whatever it might be.
Okay, that's it. That was just it. We're running short on them.
Okay. Time, but I'm thinking that you might want to, do y'all want to take a minute and look at the discussion that's due this Friday? Just briefly? Or we can do it Thursday if you want. Yeah, okay. Oh, you know what? I think in this class we needed to do the syllabus too, and we didn't have time today. Let's just look at the question real fast, and we can, start thinking about it. If you haven't already, start working on it. I think after you do the first one, you realize that if you get going on it and then kind of come back to it during the week, it's a lot less concentrated work on that Friday before your response is due. The other ones with your responses to others kind of depends on what they say. But this week it's about the wife of Bath's tale. So they want you to read some information on feminism, which you probably already know about feminism, but you can look it over. And they want to know whether or not you think Chaucer is a feminist, and whether or not the wife of Bath's tale is a feminist story. So you can give your opinion on that, but they also want you to consider Chaucer's use of comedy and satire to call attention to the blindness, excesses, and injustices of various social groups through mockery and criticism. So you can talk also about the Pardoner's Tale, which you should be reading for Thursday. And that one will come in the second part of the question here in the general prologue. So feminism and like societal satire is what they're asking you to write about this week. On your responses, it's good if you sort of break it up, there's multiple questions almost always. So you can put your answers to each question in kind of a separate little paragraph. And when you're responding to each other, you don't have to respond to the person's entire post. You can just focus, if you want, on one of their ideas. Also, if you're going to do critique, I did get a chance to start looking at them, and I'm going to start grading them tonight. But I did notice, more so in the other classes than in this one, that some people were doing the types of responses or replies to their classmates where they're just either saying you did great or you didn't do this, you could have done that, without engaging in the opinions and the literature insights that the person was saying. Like, it's not a good response to respond to somebody's post by saying, you did great, I really liked it when you said this, or this is, you could have given more quotations. That's not engaging in the material. So you can criticize or, like, be constructive about criticism with your classmates, but then you have to get into the material. You can say, you could have said, or you could have mentioned these things, or you can argue back with something from the text. But if all it is just like, thumbs up and thumbs down without engaging in the literature, then I don't think that that's a terribly good response. So just keep an eye on that as you're doing the responses to your classmates. Are there any questions about the discussions? I know I'm a little over time today. I'm gonna blame it on the wife of Bath for being so interesting. All right, where's my calendar? Thursday is the Pardoner's Prologue and Tale. It's shorter. So, and it's a totally different type of character and a totally different type of story. We'll also go over the study guide for Canterbury Tales in case there are any questions on there that you want me to discuss. So have a look at that. And then that way you can pop into the chat and say, could you talk about number 4 or number 7 so that your notes are complete. And we can, talk about discussion topic 2 Thursday or also Friday. We have class on Friday, so Friday can be a continuation of whatever we don't get to on Thursday, and then also we can address discussion 2 before it's due. All right, discussion 2 before it's due. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and end the class today because I know I'm over time, but I will see you on Thursday where we will take a close look at the partner. If there's any questions between now and then, just communicate with me and I'll be glad to get back to you, okay? All right, hope you all have a good day. Bye.